What is your creepiest true story? Please do like, share, and subscribe. I have exploding head syndrome. Take a minute to Google it if you like. My understanding of it is it's a seizure in the auditory bits of your brain that cause perception of a giant fucking noise like an explosion or a car crash. It usually comes on right at sleep onset when I'm super tired. Before I know what the fuck it was, I'd already learned to just ignore super loud noises and go to sleep. One day, I had a real bad bout of the noises and was getting frustrated at not being able to sleep and started screaming obscenities every time I woke up. That afternoon, I woke up to find that my back door had been kicked in, but nothing was stolen. I went to check the cameras, was living in a super high crime rate area, best $200 I ever spent, and apparently the burglar kicked in the door, and I immediately screamed, "Motherfucker, not again!" and he bolted back out the door. Back in high school, I was on antidepressants. I was receiving help from my family doctor rather than a psychiatrist. There's generally a week or two transition period where you have some undesirable side effects, usually nothing too major though. I was home alone taking a bath, trying to relax. I distinctly remember hearing a noise, eerie, ominous voice say, "Someone is here. Better check your closet." I tried to forget about it, but I was close to having an anxiety attack at that point and got out, wrapped myself in a towel, and warily checked the linen closet right outside the bathroom. The voice comes back and says, "Wrong closet." So I go check my bedroom closet, heart pounding and sweating at this point. After feeling a huge wave of relief that nothing was actually there, I hear the creepy voice emit this evil, demonic-like laugh, fading off into the distance. Once I started seeing an actual psychiatrist, they took me off that med real fucking quick, because apparently it can cause hallucinations. I was working as a waitress at a bar in the city, and this guy got overserved and was being pretty rowdy. He had grabbed my arm and tried pulling me over to him, so we cut him off and sent him on his way. As I was locking up the patio, maybe an hour later, he wanders up to the edge from the parking lot, seemingly sobered up a bit. I was smoking as I worked, and he called over to me and asked to bum a cigarette. I was like, sure, I'm not a huge dick. I walked over and went to hand him one, and he jumped up on the edge of the porch and grabbed my wrist and pulled me up to him. He looked into my eyes with this wild, weird look and says, "I will fucking find you, and it will be soon." I flipped out and leveraged my foot against the railing to get out of his grasp and booked it inside. I sat at a nearby Waffle House until morning, paranoid he was going to try and follow me home or something. Probably just a drunk asshole trying to get his rocks off scaring a teenage girl, but goddamn, it worked. When I was a little girl, I was playing on the beach by myself. This was pretty normal as my family owned a condo that sat directly on the beachfront. I got bored, decided it was time to go home, and started walking back towards my place. I was passing my street's beach entrance, which is a pathway in between the sand dunes protecting the beach, and I noticed an older man just standing there. I immediately got a creepy vibe, but decided to just walk by him anyways. As I did, he looked directly at me and screamed, "I'm going to screw you!" I ran all the way back home as quickly as I could, and of course told my mom what happened. I had to ask her what screw meant. Not the creepiest story, but I wasn't allowed on the beach by myself after that. Many years ago, I lived in a big old 3-story house that had a room on the middle level that we converted into an office. I used to write financial reports late at night that were published early the next morning. The office had a few computers, and my toddler son had been playing on one of them for most of the evening, right up until I finished my work at around 9 p.m. By then he had fallen asleep, so I switched off his monitor, scooped him up, and took him to bed, flicking off the light as I left. For the next couple of hours, I relaxed in another room watching TV with my wife. She went to bed around 11 p.m., and at midnight I decided to do the same. I realized I'd left the window open in the office, so I went in there to close it. The house was silent, and the room was pitch black dark and ice cold when I walked in, colder than it should have been for the time of year even with the window open. I paused for a moment in the center of the room to think about this, and then it happened. Something was tapping on the glass, but it wasn't the random tappings of a bird or another kind of animal. It was completely uniform. It sounded human. But I was on the second floor, so how was that possible? It was so dark that I couldn't make anything out against the black glass. But a few moments later, it happened again. By now, I was already feeling on edge. Then something happened that chilled me to my core, because out of the corner of the room to my right and from the darkness, a high-pitched, almost squeaky voice began to speak quite loudly. "I can see you!" I froze on the spot. My blood went cold, my bowels prepared for evacuation. My God, I thought, I never wrote that book, any book. It spoke again, but with greater emphasis on the all-important word. "I can see you!" I determined that I was almost certainly fucked, so I figured, what the hell? I turned slowly to my right and walked into the darkness until I finally reached my son's computer. Nothing there but an empty chair, but no talking now, just silence, a horrible silence. Carefully, I reached over and switched on the monitor. The screen brightened, and there it was, something red and horrible. Once again, it tapped on the glass. It was fucking Elmo from my kid's Sesame Street game. Back in 3rd grade, I was spending the night over at my best friend's house when his older sister coerced us into playing Bloody Mary sometime after midnight. Eventually, my turn comes and I manage to utter the words at the mirror and leave the bathroom only a little scared. Soon, me and my friend go to bed, and I wake up violently around 3 a.m. because I heard something. I go to wake my friend up. We were sharing his bed, and he's gone. I freak the fuck out and hide under the sheets until morning, and then work up the courage to tell his parents that Bloody Mary took him. Turns out the asshole got scared in the middle of the night and slept with his parents. Bloody Mary may not be true, but back then I was convinced she took my best friend. When I was in high school, I had a huge crush on a guy a couple of years older than me. He was on the boys' basketball team and I was on the girls' team. I would always try to get him to play basketball with me at our town's outdoor basketball court. He usually declined. One night, in the middle of winter, he asked if I wanted to come play one-on-one with him. I thought it was weird he wanted to play basketball in the middle of the night in winter, so I had my friend come with. She got bored quickly, and he was being really flirty with me, so I agreed she could leave. He assured her that he would drive me back to her house. I was spending the night there. About 30 minutes later, I'm freezing and ask him to drive me back. We get in his car, and he tells me he has to warm the car up before we can go. He's on his phone for about 10 minutes, and we're sitting there in silence. Out of nowhere, he starts telling me about his sexual fetishes and how he gets off on physically causing other people pain. He said that no one really knows the real him, and if they did, it would scare the living shit out of most people. I'm starting to get uncomfortable at this point and ask if we can leave. He pulls out of the parking lot and starts driving the opposite direction of my friend's house. We lived in a small town, and he drives about 5 miles out of town and turns on a gravel road. He tells me he's going to take me to meet some people he thinks would really like me. He then tells me I seem like the type of girl who would like being submissive to a bunch of men, and he wouldn't even have to make me beg for it. So I'm getting really freaked out and scared at this point. I'm looking for my cell phone and remembered I'd left it at my friend's house to charge. I start asking him questions to distract him. I'm finally able to get my hands on his phone when he stops at the shack. I'm in the middle of nowhere. He isn't aware that I have his phone at this point and tells me to get out of the car because his friends are waiting inside, and we don't want to make them mad. I dial 911 and tell him if he doesn't take me back to my friends, I'm calling the police right then. He looks really shocked and then starts laughing hysterically. He tried to convince me this was all a big joke, and he wanted to see how I would react. I held his phone with 911 ready to go the entire ride back to my friends. Once he pulled in the driveway and I got out of the car, he rolled down his window and said, "I would really appreciate it if you never tell anybody about this," and peeled out. I was 15 years old and should have called the cops, but I was young and dumb. I was performing an evisceration autopsy on a person that had committed suicide in their barn, shotgun in the mouth, followed by 3 days of collecting fly larvae before being found. We had removed all the organs from the chest and abdominal cavities and were about to begin the neck dissection. While standing at the head of the person, a very large black fly crawled up the back of the tongue. It just stared back for a very long 2 to 3 seconds and then slowly backed its way down the tongue, not to be seen again. The year is 2002. It's late at night, and I'm driving to my parents' house that's some way outside the city, basically in the middle of nowhere. A truck cuts me off at an intersection on my way to the highway. I had right of way and would have plowed straight into the truck if I hadn't slammed on the brakes. I honk the horn at him and give him the middle finger, which I doubt he sees, and pass him as we get on the highway. A little while later, I turn off the highway and notice that the same truck turns the same way. The roads are smaller and it's dark, so I'm driving at the speed limit and the truck catches up to me. He's getting uncomfortably close, and even though I start speeding up, he just gets closer and closer. When the truck is like 3 feet from my rear bumper, I accelerate as fast as I can and get a couple 100 yards between us, so I can quickly turn at the next intersection. He follows. I hit the accelerator and turn again when the next intersection comes along. So I'm racing down these country roads that are barely wide enough for the truck, and this asshole is keeping up. My heart is beating like crazy, but I also know the area and the roads, and as we get into the roads that run through the woods, I turn off my headlights, drive like a maniac, and manage to turn to an even smaller road without him possibly seeing me take the turn. I can't keep driving because I know the road just goes to a cabin and ends there, so I come to a stop a bit down the road and to the side so the trees will cover me, and turn off the engine, then I wait. After a while, I can see his headlights on the road I turned off from. He's driving slower now. He stops at the intersection and shines a flashlight down the road to where I am. He's looking at my direction for what feels like minutes, and I hope the flashlight can't reach all the way to where my car is. Finally, he drives away. I wait for 5 more minutes and then head back to the main road and continue to my parents' house. I was working in a convenience store, 19 years old, single mom. Luckily, this day I wasn't alone. This guy came in, walked around, and then went back to pump his gas, then drove off without paying. I got the tag number, called the police per policy, and didn't expect anything to come from it because that's what always happened. Gas theft just wasn't a priority to the police department. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an officer walks in and asks me to identify the guy, which I did. I really didn't think too much of it, just happy they caught the asshole. I went on about my business, went home, got on with life. The next day, the manager calls me early, tells me that she saw the guy who I had identified on the news. He was wanted for 2 counts of murder. He had murdered a female jogger, no apparent motive, and a convenience store clerk that he had kidnapped after robbing her. I assumed she was mistaken because that just seemed too crazy. Something I did help catch a murderer just seemed unlikely. Later that day, the officer came by and told me it was true and thanked me. Without the tag number, they may not have caught him until he had hurt more women. She also told me that the reason that the police caught him quickly was the car was stolen. Then the officer told me the scariest part of all. Coming in and walking around the store is exactly the same thing he did before the robbery, kidnapping of the second woman he murdered. I will never know exactly why he didn't rob me or worse. I assume it was because my manager was there, which was unusual. I'm just grateful for whatever it was. This was early 2003 or so, and I'm in a small southern city, so it's doubtful I'll still be online, but I'll check. This is my friend's story. She was sleeping in on Halloween morning. She was having a vivid dream that she was having an out-of-body experience, floating above herself. She was trying everything to wake herself up. She was screaming, we'll say Maggie, "Maggie, wake up! You have to wake up right now. You have to buy the kids Halloween candy." Getting up early, especially on a weekend morning, was extremely out of character for Maggie. She woke up in a panicked sweat, throws on some clothes, and leaves in a hurry because for some reason, getting Halloween candy is super fucking important right now. Once she comes back home, she opens the door and is hit immediately by the strong scent of gas. Her roommate accidentally left the gas stove on, and gas had filled the entire house. She believes, as do I, in some unconscious, last-ditch effort to save herself, she had this out-of-body dream to wake herself and leave the house immediately. These kids at my primary school were in the showers playing a trick where they would push you under a hot shower to burn you. One of the kids fiddled with the water system to make it extremely hot and tricked a kid to come close enough so he could push him under. He had third-degree burns, and we could hear his screams from all the way outside. The kids responsible didn't get any discipline afterwards because the mother of the victim was quite timid and never pushed the issue with the school. Those kids got off scot-free and are grown adults now. Creepiest true story that I remember from when I was very young. We had a nice old neighbor, male, probably in his 70s or early 80s, that lived across the street from us and had a big, beautiful black lab. His name was Lee, fake name, and her name was Booger, and she was the nicest dog ever. Well, we used to see Lee out on his porch all the time or in his yard, and we would always say hi, and sometimes my dad would go and have some beers with him later in the evening. Really nice guy. Anyway, came this hot summer. I mean hot. 110 degrees for at least a month in Michigan. That's ridiculous. We didn't see Lee out on his porch or the yard for a couple of days, but we figured he was probably staying inside with the AC, being as he was an older fella. We went to visit my aunt for 3 days. After that, because she was awesome and had a pool, lol. When we came back, my dad went to visit Lee, and I just remember everyone being really upset. Not just an old man died upset. My dad was puking in the grass when he came back, even an hour later. He wouldn't talk about it, even to my mom. I know he gave a statement to the police, and I remember seeing them take Lee's dog away. I was crying because Booger was a nice dog, and I wanted to keep her if Lee had died. I didn't understand what had happened at the time. It wasn't until I was older that my dad finally opened up to me about it. He was drunk when he did. He needed to get it off his chest. He had never even told my mother. They were divorced by the time he told me. He said that he went in the house and the smell was horrible, thick, almost oily, like you could feel it coating your mouth. He said that the first thing he noticed was the lights all being off and the flies. There were flies all over. Lee wasn't anywhere to be seen right off, so my dad looked around the house. He said that he got halfway into the hall and he heard a weird noise in the back bedroom, a repetitive noise. He said that he first thought that it was a clicking noise, but as he got closer, it started to sound more wet. It didn't even occur to him that the dog would still be in the house. The hungry dog. He opened the door to the back bedroom and said the stink hit him in the face like a ton of bricks. He almost passed out from the strength of the stench. He threw up right there in the doorway, before he even looked. Lee was in his bed, or what was left of him. His head and shoulders were intact, but he was decaying rapidly in the heat. From the chest down, Dad said he was missing most of his flesh. His gut was entirely gone. The dog still had her muzzle in him and was working on a hole in his legs. He said that the dog didn't even stop or notice him. He slammed the door and booked it home.